All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Recently, I took off to Italy. I was gone for 10 days. And for the first time in a decade, I left my computer at home. More importantly than that, when I came back, my company was producing better than it was the week 10 days prior. So the company continued to get better, it continued to grow and perform without a hitch. Today, I'm going to introduce you to two core people that made that possibility a reality because as we've found out, when I talked about this on LinkedIn, so many people reached out and said, wow, that seems like a dream. I could never leave. And so we're going to talk about how to make that a reality for you so your business is less dependent on you, so that when you are able to go on vacation, you can disconnect, leave your computer at home, and come back knowing that you've made more sales, that your delivery was on point, and so forth. So without further ado, Joe Beecroft and Stephanie Vaughn, welcome to the show.
Hey, Charlie.
Hello, hello. I'm happy to be here.
So, for context, for those of you who are new to Predictable Profits, so Stephanie is one of my co founders, and she currently is the chief of coaching, if you want to call it that, the head coaching, whatever it might be. And the big secret is Joe makes me look better. Joe's my chief of staff. He keeps things running in line because, I'm that visionary that can oftentimes go off the rails a little bit. So he kind of keeps me back in order and gets things done. So that's a little context of the different roles of the people here on the team. So I'm going to kind of kick things off a little bit. Joe, you were actually the one when I told you I was going to Italy. You said to me, "Hey, Charlie, do me a favor and leave your computer at home." Why was that important to you?
I think from working with a lot of CEOs and founders, and then obviously working with our own team, I think we would all agree that everybody needs to take a break for all the right reasons. And because so much of what businesses that we grow are dependent on us or only driven by us, we have to make all the sales, we think we have to do everything. And I think everybody needs time away in order to be better, right? And anybody who says that they don't need time off is lying. Everybody needs a recharge. And I would say, like, this as a subject, you said it, Charlie, we put it on LinkedIn and it did kind of pop. But I think it popped because we have this conversation with a lot of clients and a lot of potential clients, right? This is a fairly common thing that people feel like they can't check out of their business and they can't leave the saddle for more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And Stephanie, where and how do CEOs actually inadvertently strangle the growth of their business? Where do the CEOs become the bottleneck?
Well, I think when you're starting a company, you have to be involved in everything. You have to be involved in from operations to marketing to sales. You're doing it all. You're wearing multiple hats. And then there's a point where you're kind of at this tipping point and you realize you can't do it all the things that you were doing. And oftentimes it hits around, just around $1 million. When you're getting about $1 million in revenue, a lot of times you continue to operate at the level that you were operating when you started the company, and you have your fingers in everything, and you realize that there's a shift that needs to happen. And I think that's where we found that at one point, where everything was coming up to you. Everything that we had to decide within the company, we had to go to Charlie about. And we realized that wasn't scalable. And I think that a lot of business owners, from my experience, kind of have this S on their chest and they want to be the super solver. And they want to solve everything and they want to be a part of everything and they want to drive everything. And they end up doing the exact opposite that they want to do, which is being able to create the business that actually operates without them even being there. And so I think that there's a lot of times where we get in this place where we want to solve all problems. We want to be involved in everything. And there is a tipping point where you realize you can't do that anymore. You have to shift the way that you operate.
And that tipping point for a lot of people is quite an emotional thing with the business, right? It's never really a clouds and rainbows moment. It often comes through burnout. Don't want to be as dramatic as an emotional breakdown, but we've seen some pretty severe cases when people have had that come to Jesus moment of like, I cannot continue to do this anymore. One of the symptoms I think we see a lot is people say, I don't love this anymore. I wanted to go into business for myself and I've fallen almost out of love with my own business. Do you hear that a lot with clients and prospects, guys? It's like, do they fall out of love? Is it really falling out of love with their business, or is it just a definition of burnout?
I think there are things that you do in your business that bring you energy, and that there are things that you do in your business that just drain your energy. And in the beginning, when we're starting it up, we do more of the things that give us energy. But then when you start having to deal with employment issues and fulfillment issues, admin issues, and it starts to drain your energy. And you're just tired, you're exhausted. It's not fun anymore. But that's where it's because you need to take a step back and focus more of your time and attention on things that give you energy and be resourceful and be able to delegate the stuff that sucks your energy dry.
Charlie, what did it feel like to be on the other end of being able to take a vacation for the first time?
The first couple days, it was nerve wracking a little bit because there's this little devil in your brain that is trying to tell you stories about there's fires here and you got to do this and you got to do that. And I think it was Voltaire that said we spend most of our time worrying about things that never end up happening to us. If I jumped in, that I'd be sending you a message that I didn't trust you. And we've already built a relationship and we've come this far because I do trust you. And if I jumped in, I'd be sending the wrong message. And as a leader, how am I supposed to build other leaders inside of the company if I leave them that message that I don't believe that things are wrong? But we had this code, meaning that you knew that if crap ever hit the fan, that you could call me. So if my phone wasn't ringing, then I trusted you that there was no issues that you couldn't handle. And you and Stephanie and Zach and everybody, I could see the conversations that were going on behind the scenes of everybody stepping up and solving different problems and solving different issues. Where the mind speak sort of came into play was actually when I came home. Because when I came home and I looked at how well the business did without me, there was this little bit of feeling of, oh my God, am I really needed? And you would think for most entrepreneurs that would be awesome, but there was this little bit of like, oh my God, like I almost wanted to be needed more. It was weird. But I also realized once I got over that, it allowed me to focus on the things that bring me more energy that are going to take this company to the next level of the next. What some of the thoughts ran through your mind, Stephanie, as I was just talking? Because I saw you nodding your head.
Well, one, I was just super proud of you that you went on vacation and you didn't bring your laptop because I know you've gone to like the Cayman Islands with your family and you're like, I'm on the beach and I have my computer and I'm working. I'm like, what are you doing? What's going on? So I was really proud of you for that. I thought it was really great. And I think it is also a testament to, that we do have a team. We do have a capable team. And I think that's the case for a lot of companies out there. And I think that's why when I talk about like that S on the chest and the super solver is that feeling like we have to have our fingers in everything, that if we step away, that is all going to fall apart. And if you have a capable team and you master the ability of really learning how to delegate well, and I think a lot of times we have this, I think there's a lot of times where the pendulum swings really far. Like we own everything and we're holding on everything and we drive everything. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh no, I need to delegate more. And then the pendulum swings so far over and you might be delegating to the wrong people or the people that don't have the right skill, or you're not giving them the guidance to make sure that you're setting them up for success. So there's also a skill and
Yeah.
being able to effectively delegate. And there was actually a survey done by Gallup where it said that CEOs who effectively know how to delegate really well actually generate 33% higher revenue because that's not all bottlenecking up to, they don't have to have their fingers in the pie. They have a reliable team that they can go to. They have leaders that can drive that without them. And isn't that our goal, is to surround ourselves with people who are better at the things that we're not?
How much would you say it's a great team versus your skill of delegation?
I think it's both. I think being able to recognize and being able to choose the right tasks that you should be delegating and knowing what those are. But I think also selecting the right people for that particular task, because not everybody is created equal. And what I mean by that is we all have what we always refer to as our zone of genius. There's some things that, Joe, that you excel at better than anyone else on the team. Same thing with Charlie, same thing with me, same thing with Zach. So it's also about selecting the right people in that delegation. But I think also as we're doing that, it's also about empowerment. And sometimes I think as business owners, we tend to our ego gets in the way. And then what we find is then we almost create this kind of this vicious cycle where we want to let go, but then we're afraid of letting go because we're afraid that people aren't going to do as good of a job. One of the things with delegation is we start to delegate. We also got to remember that one, select the right people, choose the right task for that right person, but also set them up for success. Give them clear instructions, give them clear expectations. So they're set up for success to be able to carry out whatever it is that you need to do. And
Mm.
it's more repeatable.
Now, there's different levels of delegation, though. Delegation isn't just like, hey, take this and go finish it. I mean, that's one level of delegation. But what are like some of the other levels of delegation when you think about it? It's not just, I'm getting this off my plate and go do it. How do you circumvent the different levels of delegation?
Well, I think, especially from working with a lot of clients over the years, is first to get, again, identifying who's right for that task. And then have they ever done that task before? How much of a hand holding do they need? Because there's some people that you could delegate a task to, but you might need to hold their hand through the process the first time.
Yeah.
Like if I went to you, Charlie, and I was like, hey, Charlie, can you meet with my client because they need some help on marketing? And I took you through step by step by step. That doesn't be condescending. Like you already know it enough that I could literally hand off this thing to you and say, Charlie, can you go do this for me? And I would know with 100% certainty that you're going to do a great job. But if I went to somebody else on the team to do something like that, they would probably need a little bit more handholding. They would need a little bit more guidance, a little bit more instruction. And so I think you have to take in consideration the skill and ability of the person that you're asking and at what level could you delegate. So is that something where you got to handhold them through the process a little bit?
Yeah.
Or is it something that you could completely hand off to somebody knowing with 100% certainty that they're going to take it? So I think there's levels to that.
If anybody's listening to this and is looking to go on vacation and ditch everything in 2 weeks, I'm probably going to tell you it's an unrealistic time frame to have your company be so that a CEO can step away. One thing I want to point out is this has been a journey for you. This has been since obviously I've been on board and tried to take responsibilities off your plate, but even before that with things that you've worked on, this has been your journey of a CEO, and I'm sure every other CEO and founder is on their own journey. There's so many elements about task delegation to the right people on the team. Like that's not something you set 2 weeks before you go on vacation. These are through systems and processes we build as a company over the course of months and sometimes years to be able to get to this point. But you have to start eliciting those behaviors, doing those things in order, if you're ever expecting to get to a point where you can step. And again, a lot of people reach there through an emotional point of burnout or something going wrong with their company. But there are things, and I think that's what we do well here at Predictable Profits, is we help prepare CEOs and give them the tools and the mindset they need in order to make these changes and behaviors, however long it takes for their journey, that they can eventually do this. And I guess where I was going with that is like, what do you feel like, Charlie, are some of the fundamental pillars? I mean, I would lead and say things like recording and empowerment of metrics, all the way to SOP creation, to delegation, like we were talking about. But what do you see as some of the fundamental pillars that were on your journey so that you got to this point of being able to go on vacation?
Actually, it's some of those pillars were developed on the fly through you, actually, Joe. And I say that because that's a benefit of having a great team, especially when you know what you're really good at and what you're not really good at. And I'm awesome at being a visionary, but I struggle at that, like the operations and the organization type of things. It's almost like we role played for a little bit before I went on vacation, where you just started taking things off my plate and then just started running with it. And then you'd realize where you needed me. And then you'd go ahead and be like, Charlie, how would you do this? Or what did you do here? And then you built the systems and the processes around it. And so when it came time to disconnecting, you already ran through what it would look like beforehand. Like you had the systems, the processes, you knew the questions that were going to be asked and where to find the answers. That part there is really important. The other part of it, and also the first time you told me this, I had to hold back my gut response. Like I wanted to immediately lash out, but I was like, all right, I have to stop and listen to hear what he was saying. Because you said to me, hey, Charlie, you're not that smart. And I'm going, where is he going with this? But then you stopped and you go, here's the thing. We can do 80%. Sometimes we can do up to 95% of all the things that you're trying to hold on to right now. Where we need you is anywhere between the 15% and the 5%, not everything else. And then you basically issued the challenge and you're like, can you stay in the 5 to 15% and let me backfill the rest. And I was like, I had my doubts. I wonder how this is going to work.
I'll give you a little bit of credit in that I'll go one step back in time for that moment. For the first time as a company, we had taken the entire executive team to a mastermind to represent their own departments. That moment was spurred by us investing back into our team in their zones of genius to hear what they were bringing to the table and the ideas that they were processing at this mastermind, to where it was obvious that I think a part of that equation is that, do you think that if someone did something that you do on your own and they did it to 80-90% of the capacity, would that have an impact on our clients? And I think you said no, it wouldn't. So it was like, then you've got no excuse but to give up something. So I think, to go back even one step further, I think you had already started a process of investing in your team and delegating and having expectations of your team that led to that moment of, you need to back out and just do 5 to 10% of your zone of genius.
You talk about systems and operations, you got to get the company into the right place. But what I really find is it's about empowerment. You got to foster a culture of trust and empowerment within the company. And I think a lot of times as CEOs, again, totally get it. You started this business, you founded this, and then you feel like you have to be a part of that at all levels, and you continue to have to be a part of that. But the problem is when you get to that place, and what you've done is you've created this culture of the people on your team not feeling empowered to do things without your involvement. And so, even though you have processes and operations, and I'm sure this has got to ring true for some of the listeners, that you may have this in place, but you've created an environment where your team is relying way too heavy on you. They don't feel like they can make the right decisions. They don't feel like they can make decisions. And so you're doing the absolute opposite because you haven't created or you haven't fostered that culture of empowering your team to be able to step in and even make a mistake.
How do you begin to go about empowering a team? It's a big mind concept, and letting go is really, really difficult. How would you recommend someone begin that?
That's a loaded question. From my experience, when I've worked with clients, or we've talked about this, is first and foremost, you got to make sure you have the right people in the right role. You got to have the right people on the right bus. But when you start to create the ability for them to be empowered to make decisions, not only do you have to have the processes and the systems in place, you have to have the structure of the company in place. When you're empowering somebody, what I find is that if you're going to ask somebody to do the work, let them do the work. Whether you have to give them some instruction, so you got to determine where they're at their level of skill and ability. And then coming in to try and save the day, the follow up, there still has to be accountability to that. And I think sometimes also when we also delegate, sometimes we're like, they own that. So it's like we do, again, that's where the pendulum can swing really far. Is like, oh, they own that. And there's no accountability to that. The accountability, for me, what's worked really well is when you ask questions, when you get them to self reflect on what worked, what didn't, and to help them understand versus coming in and trying to save them from something or trying to pick it up if it failed. And oh, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go fix this. Because once again, it disempowers them. So there's not a lot of validation there. So, very long story short, I think that you absolutely need to give people the ability to give them a little bit of a leash for them, even if they do make a mistake. One of the best ways for us to learn is to make mistakes sometimes, and then to support and encourage the things that they are doing that's working.
You almost want to give them permission to make mistakes. I was talking to a team member recently and I made a comment. I'm like, if you're not making any mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. And they go, wait, what? And I was like, right. Like, it's okay if things aren't perfect, as long as they know what mistakes are acceptable and what's not. And it's only a mistake if you put forth your best effort, you're following the SOP and the systems, and things don't work out. But if you make the same mistake twice, that's then failure. Or if you go rogue and you don't follow an SOP or a system and you make a mistake, that's also failure. If you don't ask for help in the moment where you know you should have asked for help, that within the parameters of the delegation, if XYZ happens, make sure you ask for help, that's also a failure. So failures are not acceptable, but mistakes are perfectly acceptable and should be encouraged, actually.
I think on the flip side, also making sure that you're also recognizing people when they do a good job, validating the hard work that they do. One of the things is you got to build confidence.
We all make mistakes. Actually, most mistakes are inadvertent. They're not intentional mistakes. But it's not only is it making mistakes, so there's mistakes that can be found in metrics, and you have to own up to them. If you don't own up to them and somebody else catches it, that becomes a problem. So you have to create this culture of being okay to admit to things. But then there's this other culture of, if I make a mistake, and it hurts you in some way, that communication between the team to be able to say, as a team, all that communication has to happen. So it has to be cohesive.
I think also when you're building that trust, when you're building when they make a mistake, is also to create the space for them to be able to make that mistake and also say, "Hey, no, I still believe in you." It actually reminds me of when I worked for AT&T. I was an account executive. I just got started and I've sold business telephone equipment. Reminds me of this story. And I had a manager and she really prided herself on being very tough. And you really didn't sometimes feel like you had the space to be able to screw up. And she was especially tough on the guys, and we were all in our 20s at the time. And when you would sell equipment, you would either order black phones or white phones. And the moment that box landed at your client's place and they opened the box, it became refurbished equipment. And so I sold this particular phone equipment to a client, and she called me in and she's like, "I need to talk to you right now." And I found out that they wanted black phones and they got white phones. And I thought, oh my God, I'm just going to be destroyed because I just lost money for the company. So I walk in and I'm ready to just get reamed up and down, left and sideways from her because she did not tolerate stuff like that. So I sit down and she walks me through. She's like, "You know what happened?" She's like, "Finally." She goes, "I'm so thankful." And I go, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Well, now I know you're not perfect." And all that tense feeling and anxiety and stress just washed away from me. And it built such an incredible amount of loyalty to her when that happened. And did I ever do that again? No. I learned from that. But more importantly, and it stuck with me all these years, was the belief that she had in me, even when I made a mistake. And I think as leaders, we got to remember that when we do make mistakes, there are times that's a perfect time. Sometimes if they're repeatable mistakes, that's a different story. But it's a time to build confidence in your team to say, "Hey, I trust you. I believe in you. I know things happen. But at the end of the day, I got your back." And at the end of the day, it helps the person who's working with you to know that it builds that loyalty and it makes you want to have their back as well.
I think, and it's funny because I agree with you 100%. And Joe said, "What are my big mistakes?" And I'm trying to think about it. What are his big mistakes? I look, we all make mistakes, but it's important that as a leader, I'm not sitting there hemming and hawing and living in the past. Whatever mistakes were there, it's like, you likely brought it to my attention. We discussed it, we solved it, we moved on. So it's behind us. Guesswork is a cancer of all business. If you made a mistake and you tried to hide it from me, and then I had to go digging, maybe talk to somebody else, and then uncover it, that's something I'd still remember now. Because at that point, you've just violated two things: that our agreement of, when you make a mistake, own it up, and then trust. Trust is critically important. But we talked about when we started this podcast, when I left for Italy, you've earned that trust implicitly. So I handed you the keys to the castle right off the bat. And the first 2 days where I was stressed out, it had nothing to do with you. It was all the little devil in my shoulder that was whispering in my ears about, there's a fire, there's a fire. But it had nothing to do with you at all. Then after that, I could sleep like a baby after the devil finally quieted my ear, because I knew things were taken care of. And here's what I found out. When I came back, what I found out was the team solved problems by coming up with solutions that completely on their own, that were new and innovative, that may have ended up on my plate if I was still around. Who knows if I was still there? But they solved problems. They came up with new ideas. They came up with new initiatives and new milestones and all this other stuff. Like, in many ways, not only did the company do better just on a metric standpoint, but it did better because the company was forced to be more innovative than if I was there in and of itself.
One thing I'll say about that, Charlie, which I think is important, and I would love to get both your takes on this, is that I think when it comes to empowerment, delegation, being able to walk away and leave your team to do a good job with the process. One of the core components is that, particularly in our case, we have everybody 100% bought into the vision and rowing in that direction. So the decisions they make, the empowerment that they have within themselves as the head of a department, we all know the ultimate destination that we're trying to get to, and we trust each other to create our own journeys, essentially. And I do think it's important that in order to have true empowerment and to where then delegation works well and everything seamlessly comes together is the company's vision and destiny understood well so that people can buy into something to make a best decision on. If you're making a decision in a moment where you're not sure why you're making it, you might make bad decisions. But if you're always operating from a place and making a decision from a place of trying to get the company to the destination everyone's trying to, then I think that changes the dynamic a lot as well.
I think a lot of companies, they start off with a vision and a mission. I was just working with a client and I asked them and I said, "What's your purpose and vision of the company? Can you communicate that?" And there were two of them on the call. And one of them said, who's the CEO, said, "A vision." And I said, "Okay." And I asked the other guy, I said, "What's the vision?" He's like, "I don't really know." And I said, "Well, my guess is," I said, "because you were the two leaders of the company, that if you aren't in sync with that vision is, nobody else in the company knows it either. So you may have it, but it's all closed up and locked up in your own little book, and you're not communicating that and you're not making that a live, mission for the rest of the organization." And most people want to be a part of something greater than themselves. That's what gets them up in the morning. That's what brings passion. That's what gets you to do things above and beyond your normal role. That's what gets you excited, is to know that you're a part of doing something greater than just yourself. Otherwise, you're just coming in, you're clocking in, you're going out.
And it's important to understand that visions come in three forms. There's a stakeholder vision. So it's, hey, we're going to make $20 million this year. But if an employee isn't benefiting from the increase in revenues or profits or whatnot, then it really doesn't matter. It's not motivating. If a client knows that your goal is to make $20 million this year, well, now they think that their only purpose is to feed that. So that's good only for stakeholders. There's the employee vision, which is, why do we do what we do? What is the impact that we're going to make? That part is really important. Then there's the client facing vision. Like, the clients want to know, like, what is the big result? What do we want to do? What is the big result? So all of that is also really important when we come to overall visions. I do want to take a quick sidestep for a minute. Last week, I got a text message from the CEO who owns of an agency. And he says to me, "Hey, I'm thinking of selling my agency. I want to know, what's your opinion on that?" I know his company. And I said to him, "I think selling your agency is great, but it's not saleable right now." And that took him back. He was like, "Wait a minute. I've already made the decision that I kind of want to sell it. Why are you telling me it's not saleable?" And I said, "Because the company is too dependent on you." When you think about multiples and what impacts a multiple when it goes to a sale, many people who are buying, they want to buy a business in a box. And if I buy a business, but it's too dependent on the CEO because everything has to run through the CEO, the predominant source of leads and sales are from the CEO's network and word of mouth and referrals, and there's no SOPs, there's no systems, then I'm really not buying much, other than now I'm going to have to bring in a CEO that was formerly the business owner and pay him until I can extract all that knowledge, bring in SOPs and whatnot, and get rid of them. The more dependent the business is on the CEO, the less valuable the business is. But then it goes one step further, because I know with this particular salesperson, the records aren't being updated inside of the pipeline. In fact, the pipeline, not only is there no notes, the pipeline consists of a whole bunch of post-it notes and so forth. So even if you were going to buy the company and you take the CEO out of the question, you have no idea what's going to happen with sales in the future of the sales. So creating a saleable entity begins with removing the dependency on the CEO and then looking at the key stakeholders in the company and making sure that the company is not dependent on any stakeholder. Now, when a company says, well, how do I know that my company is really saleable for maximum valuation? One of the tests is making sure that each member of the core team goes on vacation. and can take a week off or whatnot, because you're going to quickly see where's the company been dependent on that. Like anytime Joe goes on vacation, I'll be honest, my heart goes in my throat a little bit. I'm like, oh God, Joe's going on vacation. What's going to happen? But Joe's already said, okay, I'm going on vacation. Anything that required my attention is already taken care of. Here's what you need to know. And then he goes. And then it's fine. But we have our bat phones. So in the event that crap ever hits a fan, pick up the phone. Hey, here's what's going on. But you got to go through that through every single one of your core team members. Can they go away for a week? Maybe longer? Will the company do well and survive? But if you're forcing them to check their emails every morning, noon, and night, to respond to Slack message, then guess what? You're still requiring that dependency. Actually get them to disconnect and leave the laptop at home and don't check your emails and don't get on Slack and then see what ends up happening. It's going to be the true test.
There's a really large Swiss bank, UBS. Their employees European, so they get luxurious days off every year. But they get something like 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off a year as employees, but mandatory. You have to take 2 week block. And you can't take your laptops home and things like that. But they mandatory make that you have to take a 2 week block together. So you can use your vacation how you want, but you have to block your time. And Charlie, you talk about max evaluation. That's 100% true. But that's just also true of like, you'll never get a company not dependent unless you've got like where you can take employees out as well, right? There's you as a business owner and CEO, but that mentality almost has to be everywhere. To your point of other stakeholders, you don't want a sales department. If you can leave, great. But if then your salesperson can't leave and that's a position two below you and they're depending on them, that you're not going to scale past them either, right? So this is not only just a game for the CEO and founders, but this is a massive game for just about any position, if not all positions you have at the company.
And this makes it particularly difficult when you got a small business. Like when Stephanie goes on vacation, she plays a huge role in coaching. Stephanie goes on vacation, we all feel it because that means we all have to step in and take some of the load of the things that she's been doing. We feel it because we're a small company and we're resourceful, meaning a limited number of employees. The bigger the company, the more specialized people get, and somebody leaves and it's just like not even a blip on the radar. But it is really important to understand like what the impact for each person.
And to Stephanie's credit, when Stephanie goes away, Stephanie's got the things in place that for us to easily step in and take over, right? Like Stephanie will look after her client's schedule, so we're not going to take any clients for Stephanie unless there's an emergency. But Stephanie's got the processes and the metric recording to where it's just like, hey guys, I'm out for a couple of weeks. Such and such, I need you to take care of this particular thing for me. And I need you to do this while I'm away. Because yes, we can't not do it for 2 weeks or a week. I don't think you've ever gone for 2 weeks, Stephanie. But no, we can't not do it. But we've developed and Stephanie's developed the systems and the processes to be able to be very specific with what we take over or what we need to do while she's away as well. So I think it's a good point that the smaller the business, the harder this is going to feel and be the concept in your mind is going to be crazy. But with the right things in place, it can happen. It's just a slight redelegation rather than a stepping out and everything just runs on its own.
But you have to create the culture of building systems. Everybody who's responsible for that department has to create their own systems. So I am responsible for creating the systems that I do. Stephanie's responsible for hers. You and Zach and everybody else. But at the same time, like you guys know me well enough to know that I'm not the guy who's going to sit behind my computer and document things point by point by point by point by point. So it's like you can still find other ways to cheat the system, so to speak. I'll record a Loom video and I'll be like, all right, this is what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And then I can always send it to my assistant, be like, document this in the format of a system and then send it up. And so there are so many different ways.
A colleague of mine used to ask his clients, I thought this was a really, and I think it's a good way of framing is if you went on an island and you needed your business to run without you, think about what would need to be in place that isn't in place right now to ensure that your business would operate, or who would you need in that role, or what needs to be documented, what systems or processes that aren't in place, what isn't documented that you would need to have documented and know that the business could operate without you there.
I would tell the people who are listening, if they're real serious, to creating a business of maximum. Look out, you might have to look 6 months from now and just put it on your calendar. Be like, you know what? I am going to take off. Because if you book it, if you put it on your calendar, you buy your flight, now you know I have 6 months to reverse engineer and get this done. It probably took, I mean, you and I have been working together for a long time. And Joe, our situation was different because you took the keys pretty quickly because my dad was going through cancer and so forth. And so I had to disconnect myself faster than one normally could or should. So it probably didn't take 6 months, but you definitely role played for a while to try to find out all the areas that might need my attention. And but that's for so 6 months, book it down there and start role playing and start figuring out. For some people, it means all right, you know what, start taking Fridays off. Then take Friday and then maybe take a few more days off. Just and with the understanding that if you need me, I'm here. I know we're kind of pushing up against the clock. I'm going to go around and ask you guys my favorite question. So, this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would be your number one biggest, best tip for our listeners right now who want to take their business beyond seven figures? Ladies first.
As it relates to this topic, I think one of the biggest things is just what we've talked about is empower your staff, empower your team. Don't feel like you have to be the one involved in everything because you are the bottleneck. It will always fall on you. For those that have started their own companies, very few of you started these companies because you wanted to create a job for yourself. You started a company because you wanted to have something that you wanted to leave a legacy, you wanted to build something that could create passive income or whatever that might be. But for most of you, you didn't create a job for yourself. You wanted to create a business that could run without you. And the only way that you can do that outside of all these things that we've talked about is to create a culture of empowerment and trust with your staff and your team to be able to grow your company at that level. It's one thing, but it's a very important thing. So you can pull yourself out of what it took to get you there.
I love it. And Joe?
I just think if you're at that point, and we're not talking about businesses who are solopreneurs here, we're talking about people who have already got teams and got an established company, if you like. I think it has to start with the team. I think you obviously have to get to that empowerment, but you have to put things in place to find out if this is the right team members, or if you're hiring, make sure you hire the right people for the team and really think about that process. I think when you have the right team members in the team and you have the right vision, all these things fall into place because the right team member comes to you and says, let me take that off your plate. Not every employee is a perfect employee coming up to every manager and saying, let me take that. But if you truly have a small enough but a core team that's invested, those conversations will happen. And I think team is number one for me. So I would elaborate what Stephanie said.
Yeah. And I could tell you from my perspective, I feel in many ways that I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world because not only am I surrounded by people that I could truly trust, I mean, I would give them the keys to my soul without any reservations and know that I would be in good hands. And then the other thing is hiring people that are smarter than you. As a head of coaching, Stephanie's far better at that job than I ever could be. And she's so much smarter than me. In your role, Joe, as I joke around that second half of the brain on the execution side of things, you are so much better on the execution than I am. And so knowing, to Stephanie's credit, she called it the zone of genius, knowing that zone of genius and knowing the things that are uniquely great at, staying focused in that, and then bringing in other people to surround you that have a zone of genius in an area that is complements yours, but does not duplicate yours. Because if two people have the same zone of genius that you have, one of you is not needed. So being able to fill the gaps with other people and other zones of genius can be one of the most powerful things that you can have for your company.
It's really about supporting the differences, support because we all operate and function differently because we all bring certain strengths. And I think sometimes leaders will have, or owners will have other people in the company and they complain that they don't think the way that I do. They challenge me on different things. You want to have that. You want people to challenge you. You want people to bring in different perspectives. And just being able to create an environment where you can also support the differences in what people bring and how they operate. It makes a richer environment.
All right, very cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For additional tips, strategies, and information for taking your business to the next level, to be able to grow your company faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you. Please check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that is predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudet with my stellar team, Joe Beecroft and Stephanie Vaughn, and I will see you in another episode.